The names of Scott, Burns, Carlyle, and Stevenson are familiar to most of us. Much of their writing was of the land and people of Scotland. For a better understanding of the novels, poems, essays, and stories which these men wrote, we need to understand something about the country itself, something about Scotland, background of literature. This is Scotland, that part of Britain which lies north of England. From the southern counties, which are called the borderlands, through the industrial belt that includes Edinburgh on the Firth of Forth, and on up into the northern highlands, there is scarcely a corner of Scotland that has not furnished historians with famous events and writers with romantic stories. Even today, for instance, the southeast part of the borderlands is still called Scott Country. This is the region that made Sir Walter Scott famous, and conversely, Sir Walter Scott immortalized this land. Sir Walter once said, "To my eye, these gray hills and all this wild border country have beauties peculiar to themselves." The country that borders the River Tweed is truly Scott's domain. Here near the banks of the river, he built his famous home, Abbotsford. Many of his novels were written within these stately walls. Scott was a prolific writer. Waverley, Rob Roy, The Heart of Midlothian, The Fair Maid of Perth, Marmion, The Lay of the Last Minstrel, The Lady of the Lake, and Castle Dangerous. In these and other poems and novels, we can read of the characters that were inspired by the history and enchanting beauty of Scotland. If thou wouldst view fair Melrose aright, go visit it by pale moonlight. Thus Scott sang of beautiful Melrose Abbey on the banks of the Tweed. Scott never tired of looking at this ancient monastery. The broken arches, the ruined central tower, and the delicate tracery of the east window are all beautifully described in the Lay of the Last Minstrel. Near Melrose is another abbey equally famous, Dryburgh. Here, after a life of tremendous literary output, Scott was buried in 1832. The romantic border country itself gave Scott his name, the Great Romantic. Breathes there a man with soul so dead, who never to himself hath said, "This is my own, my native land." An equally famous son of that native land was Robert Burns. He was the best interpreter of melodies and moods of Scottish life, particularly as he found it in his native county of Ayr. The plowman poet, as he was called, was a farmer who knew the beauty of the earth and its creatures. In such poems as To a Mountain Daisy, To a Mouse, The Lazy Mist, A Red, Red Rose, The Cotter's Saturday Night, we can read Burns' love of simple, familiar scenes. Here are his beloved Banks and Braes of Bonnie Doon, and the Auld Brigadoon, which you can read about in Tam O'Shanter. The thatched cottage in Alloway, where Burns was born, is now a memorial to the people's poet. Thousands of visitors a year testify to the fame of the peasant's son who wrote, "The rank is but the guinea stamp, the man's the gowd for that." When Burns died at the age of 37 in this house at Dumfries, he had won the rank of the greatest of Scottish poets. The Burns Memorial was financed with Sir Walter Scott's help, but Burns has made his own monument in the hearts of all men. Should auld acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind, should auld acquaintance be forgot and auld lang syne. North of the borderlands is the great water inlet called the Firth of Forth. The Firth is on the east coast that Robert Louis Stevenson wrote about in Kidnapped. This historic bridge spans the water of the Forth and carries traffic to and from a city that for centuries has been a center of Scottish life. That city is Edinburgh. It is the birthplace of both Walter Scott and Robert Louis Stevenson. "All hail thy palaces and towers," wrote Burns when he visited the city. "Mine own romantic town," said Scott of this city, where he was educated and spent his early years. Edinburgh's famous Royal Mile is lined with historic landmarks, among them the famous Church of St. Giles, with its memorial to Stevenson. The Royal Mile ends at Holyrood House, once the residence of Mary, Queen of Scots. Holyrood House is the symbol of Scotland's haunting and poetic past. In Scott's novel, Waverley, you can read about Holyrood and about the famous ball given in the palace by bonny Prince Charlie. Today, Edinburgh centers about famous Princess Street, which is the modern heart of Midlothian. The tall spire on the left is Edinburgh's memorial to Scott. It is a reminder of the golden age when Edinburgh played host to literary giants that included Thomas Carlyle and Daniel Defoe. Not far from Edinburgh is the statue of Alexander Selkirk. You have read his actual adventures as retold by Daniel Defoe in Robinson Crusoe. North of Edinburgh and the Firth of Forth are the Highlands, occupying 2/3 of all Scotland. "My heart's in the Highlands," sang Bobby Burns. Highland scenery is characterized by rolling hills or braes, fast tumbling streams, fogs and gray mists, and sparkling lakes or lochs. All these beautiful elements are woven throughout Scottish and English literature. "If I did not see the heather at least once a year," said Sir Walter Scott, "I think I should die." Heather and highlands, lochs and braes are all part of the natural stage for which Scott wrote his Lady of the Lake. This is the country where the stag at eve had drunk his fill, where danced the moon on Monan's rill. A region so wondrous wild the whole might seem the scenery of a fairy dream. These are the Trossachs Hills in Perthshire, where the actual scenes of the Lady of the Lake attract many visitors. One of those scenes is the lake itself, just as Fitzjames saw it. One burnished sheet of living gold, Loch Katrine lay beneath him rolled. And here, in listening mood, she seemed to stand, the guardian Naiad of the strand. Thus did Scott describe his Lady of the Lake, standing on the shores of Loch Katrine. Another lady and another lake have given the world a far more tragic story. This is Loch Leven, where on an island Mary, Queen of Scots, was imprisoned. You can read the tragic story in Scott's book, The Abbot. Not far from Loch Leven stands Stirling Castle, the same Stirling Tower of yore that Scott described in The Lady of the Lake. Today, Scottish children play beneath the ancient castle where Mary Stuart became Queen of Scotland while still a child. Stirling Castle, scene of exciting Scottish history and literature, is only one of many famous landmarks. Glamis is typical of the baronial castles. The battled towers, the donjon keep, the loophole grates where captives weep. All the details so well pictured by Scott in Marmion are to be seen in many castles. This is Cawdor, the famous castle which you should remember when reading Macbeth. According to Shakespearean tradition, King Duncan was murdered by Macbeth in Cawdor Castle. Beautiful Loch Lomond is in the country of Rob Roy, the Robin Hood of the Highlands. Another landmark of the Highlands is the monument to bonny Prince Charlie, who led the Highland clans in a tragic attempt to gain the throne of Scotland. The bonny prince and other heroes and heroines that we read about are not unlike Scottish people today. Highland girls still bring to mind Burns' lines, "I set me down wi' right good will to sing my Highland lassie o." And there is still the indomitable spirit of Scots wham Bruce has often led. That spirit springs from the land itself. It is the proud, impetuous, romantic spirit from which so much of the literature has drawn its character. By understanding the country itself, we can better appreciate its literature. The romantic literature of Scotland.